Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. Will Biden's uncompromising support for Israel cost him the votes of anti-war Americans this November? Let's get to the bottom line. Poll after poll indicate that the majority of Americans are dissatisfied with the Biden administration's handling of the Israeli scorched earth campaign in Gaza. The International Court of Justice has found that Israel is plausibly committing a genocide in Gaza, but more than 1,000 Palestinians have been killed since that ruling. And the shortage of food, of water, shelter caused by Israel's siege of Gaza is getting worse every day. Many Americans are protesting the administration as it not only staunchly supports the war, but it's supplying the weapons and providing the diplomatic cover for Israel to pursue its plans. Now there's talk of a temporary pause, mediated by the White House, but no permanent ceasefire. So with elections 9 months away, will Biden be punished at the ballot box for his support of Israel's war? Today we're talking with independent presidential candidate Cornel West, one of America's most prominent philosophers and activists for racial, social, and economic justice. Let me just start out, Dr. West. You are running for president of the United States. You have launched a new political party. I'd like to just start out and say, if you were president, you were in the White House, how would you approach the Israel-Palestine crisis right now?
Well, you see, I'm deeply concerned about trying to find a space for morality and spirituality and political courage in a world of overwhelming barbarity and bestiality. And so I'm running to be head of the American empire in order to dismantle the American empire. America should be a dignified and decent nation among nations and not an empire that other nations defer to. So what we have in the Middle East right now, and especially in Gaza with my precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, we've got a level of psychic, spiritual, military, physical violence that is just beyond description. And that's usually the sign of an empire in deep decay and decline and dissolution and disintegration. Because when you get a shift from one imperial center, and once that America's being decentered, you usually get certain forms of intense violence, like the genocide against Jewish brothers and sisters, our precious Jews in 1940, in the early 40s. That was a sign of the decline and decay of the European empire. Then a new era was in the making, and that new era produced the Soviet Empire and the United States Empire. Well, right now, Gaza, in many ways, is a pivotal moment, because it's a sign of the lack of credibility, the lack of legitimacy of a world that's been dominated by the U.S. empire. And I, speaking as one who comes out of the bowels of the American imperial beast, that is to say, black people, like indigenous people, have been the underside of the American empire, deeply committed to morality and spirituality, telling the truth about the American empire and its satellite countries like Israel, keeping track of the crimes against humanity, keeping track of the war crimes, keeping track of the crime of genocide. And so to be in a campaign, which is nothing but a moment in a movement of a people. And keep in mind, my dear brother, 1953, it was black folk who brought the United States to the United Nations and said, we charge genocide. That was the great Paul Robeson. That was the great William Patterson. That was the great W.B. Du Bois. These are towering figures in the history of the American empire, but anti-imperialist, critical of the empire and its various forms of domination and degradation. So for me, it could not but be a choice to be in solidarity with any peoples who have been victimized by the U.S. empire. It could be overthrowing Guatemala, overthrowing Iran, overthrowing Panama. We've got a long history of U.S. imperial interventions in the world, Haiti and so forth and so on, killing Lumumba in the Congo. Well, right now, we have Israel and the United States intertwined in what? An enabling of an execution of the crime of genocide. And so I run as a presidential candidate and being very honest and saying, Joe Biden, you're a war criminal. You are enabling the crime of genocide. Kamala Harris, Lloyd Austin, Blinken, Sullivan, Kirby, I speak to you as American citizen to American citizen, but also as a Jesus-loving, free Black man who's trying to find moral and spiritual space in a world of overwhelming bestiality and barbarity. That's what I see in Gaza. So I cannot but raise my voice, but also raise my voice in a context of the transformational forces and tendencies taking place on the globe.
Right.
And of course, we know this is not new.
Right.
We as human beings, we are wretched and a wicked species, organized greed, institutionalized hatred, and forms of indescribable indifference to the suffering of the vulnerable has been part and parcel of our history ever since we emerged from the caves in Africa. Right. But we're also a marvelous and we're also a magnificent species. We can fight, we can dream, we can laugh, we can love, we can grin, we can sing, we can organize, we can be in solidarity like what is happening right now in Gaza, and my solidarity with them is forever.
Cornel, I want to play a clip for you of President Biden talking about the $100 billion aid package that he's wanted to direct military support to Ukraine, to Israel, and to Taiwan. Let's listen for a moment.
And when we use the money allocated by Congress, we use it to replenish our own stores, our own stockpiles, with new equipment. Equipment that defends America and is made in America. Patriot missiles for air defense batteries, made in Arizona. Artillery shells manufactured in 12 states across the country, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, and so much more.
Well, he's talking about the economics of war and the jobs that are connected to the bombs that are going to Israel to drop on Gaza. I mean, your thoughts?
Well, you can just see how morally bankrupt that is. He's trying to appeal to my fellow citizens in terms of their economic interests and not a mumbling word about moral principle and ethical integrity or the damage done to precious human beings in those parts of the world. It's an example of trying to somehow hide and conceal the ugliness, the underside of imperial policy by appealing to people's economic interests at home. And we already know them. If we wanted to tell the full story, at this point, it's 62 cents for every dollar that goes to the military-industrial complex. The United States has not declared a war based on its Congress since World War II. Every military incursion has been proceeding out of the executive order without congressional approval, and that's been Democrats, Republicans across the board. But that's what empires do, like the Roman Empire, like the Ottoman Empire. We can go on and on. Military overreach abroad, corruption of elites. In America, that's the case of both parties. Citizens feeling desperate, citizens feeling impotent, helpless, hopeless, and usually succumb to some neo-fascist Pied Piper, in this case, the case of Donald Trump, but also feeling as if the only alternative to that neo-fascist Pied Piper is war criminals in the Democratic Party who act as if they want to save the soul of a nation and yet enable genocide, who act as if they want to defend democracy and are anti-democratic within their own party, anti-democratic in terms of those bombs that they sell that are dropped on children. What is it now? 13,000 priceless, precious children, and those Palestinian children have exactly the same value as my child, exactly the same value as white children, or Chinese children, Iranian children, and so forth. That's the end and aim of a freedom-fighting project that tries to provide some moral and spiritual space where political courage can be enacted to raise our voices, and we keep track of the indescribable barbarity and bestiality. And that's what we're seeing right on our screens every day. And I thank God for this channel. At least you all continue. You see, in America, the corporate media has turned away from the bestiality and the barbarity. Every once in a while, there's a story now on Gaza as if there's not an ongoing genocide. What kind of a country is America? At its worst, an imperial project concerned with narrow economic interests and concerned with geopolitical expansion. What is America at its best? Martin Luther King Jr., Edward Said, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We can go on, and I'm trying to make sure that America tries to stay in contact with the best of itself, which is, of course, the best of the human spirit, which is all about love and justice and integrity and honesty and solidarity based on morality and a spirituality that has to do with recognizing that our narrow narcissisms and narrow chauvinisms can lead us off the cliff. And that's a long story that goes all the way back. The Hebrew scripture goes all the way back to Egyptian formulations, the Book of the Dead. It goes all the way back to Sophocles and Aeschylus and Aristophanes.
Well, let me ask you something that may be happening in America right now, is that younger voters seem to be tuned into the crisis in Gaza, that their support for the Democratic Party and for Joe Biden has declined. I don't know if they're going to rush to Donald Trump. They may run to a third party. They may run to you. But I'm interested in the fact that they are paying attention and that there's something going on generationally where young people don't remember the Cold War. They don't remember American empire as you framed it in the same way. And I'm interested in whether your message, you feel it's resonating with them, and do you feel that this is the moment where many of those people are going to reject both of the major parties and go elsewhere?
Oh, I think that's very true, my dear brother. I mean, we shall see, but I do feel that. And as you know, I do 4 or 5 events every day and have done over 500 and some interviews, and I can pick up the geist, I can pick up the spirit of the empire and the spirit of the nation. Young people are tired of the lies that hide the crimes. And this is true among our wonderful young Jewish brothers and sisters. Look at If Not Now, Jewish Voices for Peace, and even many Jewish voices beyond those organizations. They're tired of the lies and crimes that have been, the lies told and the crimes hidden. They've been told to them by their parents and their grandparents and so forth. We're seeing this more and more among everyday young Black, brown, indigenous, Asian young people. And so very much like 1960s, where both in the American empire linked to crimes in Vietnam, people are awakening, but its awakening goes far beyond the narrow talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is part of the right-wing toolkit to attack progressives in the United States. But we're not talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in any narrow sense. We're talking about truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. We're talking about justice. And justice is what love looks like in public and what tenderness feels like in private. It is a human affair, much deeper than skin pigmentation, much deeper than religious identity, much deeper than national affiliation. That's why my solidarity with my Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza, I do that as a Christian, as a Black man, as a citizen of the U.S. Imperial Republic. Why? Because the humanity always cuts deeper. And I've said on many occasions, if there were a Palestinian occupation or a Palestinian crime of genocide against Jews, I would be in solidarity with my Jewish brothers and sisters. It is a moral and spiritual issue. And that's crucial. If Black people were treating white people the way white people have treated Black people, I would be in solidarity with my vanilla brothers and sisters. It's a moral and spiritual issue. Well, right now, who is being subjugated, who's being degraded, whose humanity is being thoroughly called into question, who is being viewed as if they're less than human, treated as non-entities, as if the deaths of all of those precious babies and children and women and men can be just tossed aside, and you get some kind of reflection on narrow economic calculation of a Joe Biden. Please, please, I have no patience for that. Irene and Clifton West and Shiloh Baptist Church and the Black Panther Party shaped me as a teenager, and I will be true unto death. I'll be faithful unto death, trying to tell the truth and be in deep solidarity with any people who are oppressed, let alone those undergoing such vicious genocidal attack right now.
I want to ask you, Dr. West, about the soul of this nation in a different way. The state of free expression. We just saw the president of Harvard University, where you've had a lot of tussles too, in fact, both dealing with Palestine. You a decade ago, Claudine Gay more recently, but also another dimension, which is about running and giving people options that are running for office, giving those choices. There are a lot of folks out there trying to stop you from running. And I'm interested in how you see free expression in the soul of the nation from your perspective when it comes to the debates we're having today and the election you are running in.
Yes, well, my dear brother, the anthem of Black people is lift every voice. And it's not lift every echo, but lift every voice. And it reminds you of line 24a of Plato's Apology, where Socrates says, the cause of my unpopularity was parrhesia. Well, what is parrhesia? Plain speech, frank speech, unintimidated speech, fearless speech, speech that is free, that comes from your heart, mind, soul, and body. That's what it is to lift your voice. And of course, you hear it when you listen to an Aretha Franklin, or you listen to a John Coltrane play a saxophone, or you listen to a Mary Lou Williams play her piano, let alone a Duke Ellington or a Count Basie. They're raising their voices. Now, that's freedom at its deepest level. Now, I am a libertarian to the degree to which I have a profound commitment to free speech, even with those with whom I have deep disagreements with. I defend people's right to be wrong in public conversation. That's why I have so many dialogues with right-wing, centrist, liberals, far-right, and of course, left-wing, because we have to all lift our voices, be able to enter public space without humiliation, and have enough respect that we learn and listen and grapple. Now, there's always operations of power that's structuring the context. But free speech is something that's crucial, and it is under very, very intense attack right now. I was so sorry to see my dear sister Claudine Gay lose her job given the vicious attacks that took place. And it was unfortunate that she was so relatively weak in responding to the question about genocide of Jews. She should have just come right out morally and said, of course, any genocide, no matter who it is, Tutsis, Armenians, anybody, needs to be called into question. But then the attacks below the belt and the plagiaristic charges and so on. When I was pushed out of Harvard a number of years ago, I was faculty advisor to Palestinian students. I was glad to do it. I would do it again, over and over again. That there was very little support, including even Claudine herself. I called her a number of times and didn't receive a phone call, but I defend her based on principle. But you see, what happens is that once you allow these things to set in place, the attacks on free speech take a number of different forms. And so when you don't defend free speech, then it comes back to your house. And when you're in trouble, you're looking for people to defend you. We have to be morally consistent. We have to have what the great Jane Austen called ethical constancy, where we're there in word and in deed, standing on principle to the best of our ability.
There is a movement right now, I think, in terms of the upcoming election to frame this, that you, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Jill Stein, if you run, you could deliver the presidency to Donald Trump, because Joe Biden does much worse if you're all in that. Is that a fair assessment? Is that something that if you were to run and these others folks were to run and Donald Trump were to come out on top, is that something that you can countenance?
No, I think that's the very narrow, impoverished narrative of corporate media, because they think that Biden has some kind of ownership over votes that are center and moving toward the liberal and left position. And Trump has some ownership over those on the right. But no, each candidate has to earn their votes. Over 40% of my fellow citizens, nearly 40%, don't vote at all. And so a large portion of the persons who would vote for me have told me I would never vote for Democrats. I would never vote Republicans. In fact, I haven't voted for a long time. Glad you're running, Brother West. You got my vote. Well, that's important. That's important. Why? Because you're reaching out to citizens who have completely given up, who are fatalistic and cynical and almost nihilistic about American politics, and they're giving it another chance. And so the very notion of being cast as a spoiler is part and parcel of the ways in which we have such a truncated narrative in place about American politics. You see, no politician earns any sector of citizenry's vote. You've got to earn it. When people vote for me, they're voting for me. They vote for Biden, they vote for Biden. They vote for Trump, they vote for Trump. Neither one of us own that vote. People are thinking and voting on their own. Now, I'll say this when it comes to my precious Arab and Muslim brothers and sisters, that the Democratic Party looks upon them as if they're just an interest group, as if they're only concerned with a calculation of their own interests. And they don't understand that you got a Democratic Party going into Muslim communities saying, well, vote for us because of our economic policy, and overlook the fact that we as a Democratic Party have enabled genocide and the killing of your mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers. And you can imagine Muslim brothers and sisters, especially our Palestinians, that say, do you dehumanize us in that way that we become just a non-entity to be manipulated in regard to your Machiavellian politics? We're talking about our mothers. We're talking about our fathers. We're talking about our aunts, our uncles. We're talking about our mosques, our hospitals, our health systems. We're talking about our schools. We're talking about our civic structure. This is not some electoral political issue. This cuts very, very deep. And that's the way it ought to be, because this is far beyond politics when you're talking about empires dissolving, when you're talking about crimes of humanity, when you're talking about crimes of genocide being enacted. Right back again, the issues of morality and spirituality, not narrow issues of Machiavellian politics and these Hobbesian calculations of what kind of interest we have and how does it connect to our interest. That's what the Democratic Party does not understand. That's what the Republican Party does not understand. That's what my candidacy, I think, tries to bring to mind.
Dr. West, if you were speaking now, and you are speaking to some because we're watched there, to both Palestinians in the middle of this crisis and to Israelis watching, what advice and counsel would you give them about their future that they should hear?
I would say first that we must never, ever look at a Palestinian community or an Israeli community as monolithic and homogeneous, that you're looking at human beings in both communities. And there are human beings in both of those communities who do understand the viciousness and ugliness of the crime of genocide. And I'm not just talking about the Noam Chomskys in America or the Gideon Levy's in Israel. There's a whole wave of Israelis who understand what the crime of genocide is, and they refuse to deny it. It's not reflected in their government. It's not reflected even in their majority vote of the Knesset. Same is true with Palestinians. When people look at Palestinians, you ought to see a whole plethora of very rich and magnificently creative human beings. You shouldn't look and see Palestine. When you look at Palestine, you shouldn't see only one group. People come at me and say, well, you must be pro-Hamas. Well, I'm pro-humanity. I'm pro-Palestinian. I'm pro-humanity. Yes, I'm pro-Israeli in the sense that any of those persons in those communities who are choosing freedom, who are choosing equality, I'm in solidarity with. I'm against war crimes, no matter who commits it. It could be the terrorism of the IDF. It could be the war crimes of Hamas. It could be the terrorism of the U.S. Army or the Russian Army or the Ukrainian Army. It's a moral issue. But it's very important that we understand that there's possible solidarities that cut across Palestinian communities and Israeli communities, and Jews and Palestinians not only must, but they will learn how to live together. And let's be very honest about this, brother. the two-state solution is dead. Israeli settler colonial expansionism has undercut the two-state solution. It is not feasible. It is not workable. Right now, there's a one state, and there's a state of apartheid and ethnic cleansing with the crime of genocide taking place. That's one state. That's from the river to the sea in its Israeli imperial form. And what's the alternative? Either a one state, which is secular, where there's equality. There must be Palestinian dignity and Palestinian equality, just as there must be Jewish security and Jewish safety. There must never, ever, ever be an annihilation, a genocide of either Palestinians or Israelis, Israelis or Palestinians. Which means what then? Either there's one state which is secular, or there's one state with two nations, very much like Switzerland, or we can explore possibilities. But the notion of a two-state now is nothing but a mirage. It's a subterfuge. It's a refusal to engage in the 700,000 Jewish settlers who have undercut the possibility of a two-state solution. So when you hear that reference from Biden and European leaders, you can be assured they still are looking for an Israeli-dominated situation. And there will never be precious Jewish security and safety predicated on the domination of precious Palestinians. It will not work.
Let me ask you finally, I think in another conversation we had, I told you I worked closely with Chalmers Johnson in the 1990s. He wrote a book called Blowback, The Costs and Consequences of American Empire. That book became the most difficult book to get after 9/11 because that was an attack on the United States by others, and it looked as if that was something that Chalmers had sort of seen coming. I'm interested in domestic blowback. When you talk about the moral collapse inside, what does blowback look like as you framed it domestically?
It's a wonderful question, though. And two other texts to keep in mind is Du Bois's great book on colonies and peace that he wrote in response to 1945 June in San Francisco, based in part on the essay that he wrote called Winds of Time, where he said, I conceive of a World War III in which the American empire tries to suppress Russia and stranglehold China. And that's 1945, Colonies and Peace, very connected to Chamber Johnson's work. And also the great William Appleton Williams' book of 1980 called Empire as a Way of Life, which is his understanding of American history. These are some of the few persons, and it's true, you got Brother Neil Ferguson's whose book Colossus is very important, written from a conservative point of view, but full of a lot of insight. The acknowledgement of the United States as an empire. Most of my fellow citizens don't even look at America as an empire. When I use that language, they think that I'm, flying high in the friendly skies on the crack pipe or something. I said, no. We're not just a democratic experiment with some deficits. Ask our precious indigenous peoples, ask Latin American countries, ask the rest of the world with 800 military units around the world in over 100 countries and over special operations in over 142 countries and only 193 countries in the United Nations. So the blowback internally is what? Denial, lies, crimes hidden and concealed. That's why Julian Assange is in jail. God bless his soul. He revealed the crimes. America couldn't take it. So much for a commitment to journalistic freedom. No, those lies and crimes will not live forever. Truth crushed the earth will arise again precisely because people will struggle. People will tell the truth. People will live. People will die. But sooner or later, the truth will surface. Chickens come home to roost. You reap what you sow. And so internally, the internal decay, the distrust, the paranoia, the attempt to make America great again. That's already a sign of deep decay and decline. It's symptomatic of the disintegration. So America's not great now. Well, when was it great? When it was really in the driver's seat of the world and we were the uncontested imperial power, could do anything with no accountability and no answerability. Like Trump himself, say anything, do anything with no accountability. That's exactly what Israel's doing right now. Say anything, do anything with hardly any accountability owing, with the exception now, of course, of voices around the world and South Africa, that I'm in very deep solidarity with South Africa and the other countries, bringing this crime of genocide to the International Court of Justice. And so the internal decay is very real, my brother. All we need to do is read Tacitus and his reflection on the internal decay of the Roman Empire. All we do is read through Thucydides, the internal decay in Athens. We can go on and other empires. But keep in mind, the good news is there's always a cloud of witnesses tied to truth, justice, and love, and go down swinging with a style and smile. Yes, look at the dignity in the faces of our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Gaza. Some of them even giving the victory signs in the face of that bestiality. That's the marvelous element of the human. But we know how wretched and wicked we all can be, and we see it so clearly in Gaza at this moment.
Well, unfortunately, we need to leave it there. Presidential candidate and renowned American philosopher, Dr. Cornel West, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, my brother. You stay strong now.
So what's the bottom line? Women and children are being killed in Gaza at staggering scale. Innocent men waving white flags and standing in the open and obviously unarmed, seeking to know the circumstances of their loved ones, are murdered by Israeli snipers. You're not going to see this on traditional TV, but it's on TikTok, it's on social media everywhere. No one can pretend anymore that Israel's war is just about hunting down and killing Hamas commanders and participants in the October 7th attack by Hamas in Israel. The world has seen this before, many times. I can't breathe, George Floyd said. Americans exhausted from the systematic discrimination, harassment, and killings of black men had to go on a campaign saying Black Lives Matter. What does that even mean? It means that many felt as if one set of lives mattered more than others. In Palestine today, especially in Gaza, we're seeing the dominant power behave as if the lives of innocent folks, men, women, and children, simply don't matter. We hear Israeli leaders reference Palestinians as animals. This is outrageous. And my guest today, Cornel West, is shining a light on the principle that humanity is everyone's. No one is less valuable than the other. And the injustice we see has to stop. The Palestinians can't breathe. Palestinian lives matter. And that's the bottom line.